Welcome to Neighbor. My name is Lynn Coram. I'm your host today, and today my guest is Milt Eaton. Milt, thanks for joining us again.
It's a great pleasure to be back, Lynn.
Yeah. Well, you've been with us before in the past, but we find you so interesting on many different subject areas, so we keep inviting you back. So we're thankful for that you're willing to give us the time.
It's my pleasure to get a chance to say a little bit about some of the things I'm interested in. So thank you very much for having me.
Good. You and I had discussed and thought we would talk about Parkinson's Law. And you have a book you can hold up and let people know that it actually is a book, and we aren't making this up. And so let's talk about Parkinson's Law. It was a book written, I think, by the copyright on that in 1957.
It was published in 57. He wrote it before that time when he was a professor down in Singapore. So he is one of the few economists who will talk about the impact of buying snakes to get the bad snakes out of the jungle and having people develop a business of growing snakes to sell them to the government to get rid of them and to make money. So C. Northcott Parkinson is one of the most unusual economists around and a real world philosopher. So he was fun to meet and a very unique person.
And you knew him personally?
I met him. I wouldn't say I knew him, but I met him, and I truly fell in love with his approach to economics. I became very disturbed when everyone became mathematically crazy. Just last week, somebody on the television cable had a number that was 14 trillion, and 9 cents as a projected debt for the federal government. This kind of economics is nonsense, but we went through a period of this, and Parkinson punched holes into these ideas and looked at the real world and said, this is the way it works.
Well, you shared this book with me and read it, and my first impression was, here's an economist who takes into account the human factor. And most economists sort of have this computer model, but you can't feed that human factor into that mix, but he's able to do that.
Well, he looks at that, but he also does the mathematics to show how ridiculous it is. And of course, he was talking back in an earlier time, and originally talking for the British population, literally hated because he pointed out that governments work quite differently from businesses in economics, in that the goal is to grow, and you have no measure to be measured against, and therefore government exponentially grew whether there was any need for it or not. I saw the same thing in Washington, where they still had boards for dealing with Indian tribes that have been gone for 50 years or 100 years now, I guess. And then he added on other laws as well.
Wasn't it Reagan who said there's nothing closer to immortality than a government program or something like that?
It's a very accurate statement, because people become emotionally and economically involved with that program, and just because the program's not needed any longer, that doesn't mean for those individuals they wouldn't like to continue that program.
And keep being paid for it.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I was just finding out earlier that the state of Vermont, the government jobs have grown, government has grown 70% over the last 10 years in the state of Vermont, and private business has grown 0. So that's a collision course being set up, and a lot of these things we're going to be talking about today, we'll talk about this. Information's out there.
Yes. And if we look at the record, it obeys Parkinson's Law. He only half-jokingly said that by 2035, there would be no other jobs but government jobs because the government would absorb everybody.
He was talking about England, I hope, on that, but hopefully, I don't know what the way the United States is going, it could be us.
It's universal.
Universal.
It's a universal habit.
Phenomenal.
When I was in Washington, at first with the Department of Commerce, we had an assistant secretary who was called the Director General, and we had 2 deputy assistant secretaries. Now they have 14 deputy assistant secretaries and above to do the same work. And that's in 20 years now.
Wow. So imagine it if it doubles again, and of course it would, yeah. If not more.
Because if there are enough of us, we have to talk to one another. And I have to send you a memo, and you have to clear my memo, and that means we have to have a meeting. And we're very busy. We just aren't very productive.
That's basic. That's sort of baseline Parkinson's. Let's talk about his first law, which says that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion.
His example is a wonderful example. The lady who has nothing to do except write a letter inviting someone to tea will probably take all day selecting the stationery, deciding how she wants to write it, finding a stamp, the address, and mailing it, and her day is consumed. The busy person might do that invitation in 5 minutes or less, and then go on and do something else. It really is the law that comes back to why you give someone who is very busy the job to get done, because the person who's not busy and doing nothing, all their time is spent already.
They take a long time to get it done, if ever, yeah. His second law is the law of extravagance. And I have several notations under this one. Extravagance rises to meet income. So the more we have, we won't necessarily save it. The more we have, the more we'll feel that we deserve more things.
And we get used to spending so much money, and then it becomes a necessity.
How can you live without?
How can you live without?
Yeah.
And governments, our local government as well as other governments, when they have, when times are booming and more money comes into the coffers, the legislature must find a way to spend that to do good for all of us. But when the money stops coming in, those commitments and promises, politically, they don't call you up and say, well, we're stopping this program. That's just not done. So the law of extravagance means you go on. But also, and this is partly due to taxes, health insurance is high on the list right at the moment. Why do some companies and unions have very extravagant health benefits? It is because during a period of price control, the government allowed companies to give benefits which were not taxed first. If I cannot pay or give someone money while traveling for the company, he will go and stay at the best hotel and drink good wine with dinner and spend money, which is an expense, rather than economize and save and make the company more money. So the law of extravagance covers a broad spectrum, not just in the government, but also in the private sector. And in my opinion, it relates directly back to the impact of taxes.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that would go to the government is regulations add rigidity to waste. This is a little confusing for me, what this means.
I have to do it this way because otherwise we can't get the credit or the benefit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to spend the money or we won't get it, will be cut next year.
Yes, yes.
So you don't look for efficiencies in any way. The money, if you don't spend the money, it won't be there next year.
Spending the money is an important factor. I remember years ago when the Air Force flew all their planes 24 hours a day just before the end of the year, so they would have used up their fuel.
Oh, use up their fuel so they could get the same allocation next year.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And it's too bad when that happens that you just can't, I think there have been some people who have been brave enough to say, I've used 10% less this year. Can you, give me 5%, cut it 5% if you can or something. The bureaucrats would say, oh no, we have to cut it 10% then. So that leaves that fear, but it's...
Well, especially in government.
You're not rewarded for being efficient like this.
They talk the reward, but the reward is not there. If you have reduced your cost by 10%, part of your budget may be given to somebody who spent all their budget in the first 6 months because they need it.
Uh-huh. Oh, yes, okay. Yeah. And another one of his things are, and you've talked about this before, priorities are not often developed or followed if they are developed. And that's a big problem with government, prioritizing.
It's a problem with the government, and it's a problem with many people, just in general. But if an individual has different priorities or doesn't prioritize, that's their problem. If the government does not prioritize and do what they need to do,
that's everybody's problem.
That's our problem,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. He also mentions that the press and the public should be the ones that control the spending. They should be the ones who put the pressure on politicians to do this. However, you're trying to impose these ideas from the outside. Often the politician's reaction is to say, yes, that's a good idea, and then they wait a year, so you forget it, the pressure goes away, and then they go around on their merry way.
It's called, we have to study it.
Form a committee.
Form a committee. And in the government, there are 4 things you should never say at a committee meeting.
Okay.
What have we decided? What are we going to do? Who's going to do it? And when is it going to be done? The tendency will be that we have had a meeting, and that is our goal, and we go on. And as you said, by then the public's interest or the media's interest has moved on to a new subject. Mm-hmm. So putting things off, procrastination in a bureaucracy is manifest.
Well, it's part of the strategy, I would think.
Part of the strategy. Conscious or unconscious.
I was just going to say, I don't think a lot of these things are intentional.
No.
But it just, given the dynamics of that kind of a group. Another dynamic that Parkinson talks about is how if a program is going to be cut, people act like sheep being encircled by wolves and being endangered by a predator, and that they put the weak on the inside, face with horns the outside. What is it here? Deny, yield nothing, deny everything, and conceal all. It's just classic. And
that's classic. And in our country, we also talk about circling the wagons because of our frontier experience. And the Department of Interior, where a lot of money goes, they always talk, the first thing they say they're going to do if they have to cut the budget is close the Washington Monument. That is the premier tourist spot, and nobody wants to close the Washington Monument, and nobody would if their budget is adjusted, but that is the
threat.
First part of the not yielding anything.
Mm-hmm. and denying everything, denying that there's a problem, and concealing all.
Yeah.
That's very
Yeah.
interesting stuff.
The denying the problem is, it's very interesting because the truth is some people get ahead by saying, yes, we have a problem and we have recognized that problem and we're working on it and try to attack it. Usually people out of office mention recognizing the problem. But they are always dealing with the people that want to deny that there is any problem.
Our legislative session in the Vermont legislature, from what I'm hearing, there's big denial as far as how big the problem is going to be this year. It's going to be very ugly.
Using the Japanese word tsunami, I think, is perhaps the appropriate word. And the Oriental junk is a boat that is designed in a very different way because it is designed to go up over a very steep wave without pitching. And I think we may need some junks in Vermont in the next couple of years. And it's not just in Vermont, it's in the United States. When you look at states like California, Massachusetts, New York City, all of these areas that have undertaken so many entitlement programs with a lack of control and funding on a base, these all apply.
Yeah, and I think that we were talking on one of our shows with the state auditor, Tom Salmon, and he said this is not a 5-month problem we're going to be facing. This is more like a 5-year, if we're lucky.
I was going to say, I'm glad to hear that Tom is optimistic.
Oh, Milt. Well, we will see, and I just know that there are books out on the Depression that said that the Great Depression could have been over in 3 or 4 years if the government had stayed out of it. But instead it went 13, and only the war pulled us out of that one. So it's very concerning what's happening, and which is why we're talking about, this philosophy of how people act and how the government's relationship with people.
Yes.
It's very interesting. Okay.
Well, another part of this law is that it's not just stopping waste, which is part of the earlier extravagance, but to spend what we can afford.
And to try to figure that out.
And to figure that out. An old friend who understands money and economics very well used to say, it does not matter how much I earn or how much I make when the credit card people say, how much do you make? He said, it is that I spend less than I make.
Right.
And that is something that is a separate subject.
I've heard some wise people say it's not when you go into retirement or something, or even before, it's not how much you make, it's how much you spend.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, another law that he has is the law of triviality, meaning time spent on any item of an agenda will be in inverse proportion to the sum involved.
Absolutely true. One of his examples in the book actually is nuclear power plant, yes or no, safety or unsafe, but the board doesn't have to discuss it. But the kind of broom that the maintenance people use to sweep out the conference room, everybody knows about the cost of brooms and the quality of brooms, which is not the situation when they're talking about a nuclear power plant. So that should take as much time as is available in the day to finish that discussion.
Yeah.
And those are a bit extreme, But it is true, terribly true, that many important things are decided literally over a martini at lunch. And it may take months and years to work it all out because the people doing that quick decision did not know what they were talking about.
Yeah. Well, we've also seen it when we look at town budgets or school budgets or state budgets. An item of maybe $2,000 will consume a half hour of discussion, whereas the big budget at the end, the $27 million budget, that passes in voice vote, in 5 minutes.
Well, I think one of our problems in that we're all guilty of is when you write down 2M for 2 million, and then below that you say 2,000 and you put 2000.00. One looks bigger than the other.
Yeah, true. So, but again, here's all these little mind games that are going on that people do.
Always.
And
have you looked at your gasoline pump lately?
No, I haven't.
Well, on your pump today, and everyone should look at this, the gallons now are in thousandths of a gallon. It's the gallon .000.
Oh, instead of just 2 zeros.
Instead of 10, it used to be
one?
10. And nobody does 1/100th of a gallon, but it's so that the number on the pump looks bigger, what you're getting fuel-wise, than the price above it, which is still in dollars and cents.
Okay. To make us, this is all just sort of make us feel better, right?
Make you feel better.
Just like
I want everybody to feel better.
Okay. So we'll all look at our gasoline pumps and see if they have that. Yeah. He has laws on taxation. And as taxes rise, more people find ways to avoid the collection of taxes. And therefore, the taxer, the state, collects less. And now this is a really Republican thought here, that we always say that the more you raise your taxes, the less you're going to get. And the Democrats and progressives have never bought into that idea.
No.
It's really foreign for them. But there are many incidents we can see in our examine history, and that's exactly what happens. But we keep hoping it won't happen, I think.
Well, I don't know if we hope it won't happen.
Well, we don't hope it won't happen,
no,
but they
they believe that it won't happen. Because Parkinson was in Singapore, he was very familiar with many overseas Chinese, who the diaspora of the Chinese from the mainland of China meant that they had no geographic loyalty necessarily to any one state or nation they were in. So this applied and dramatically to them. As long as taxes were under 10%, there was no problem. They just paid it. It was easy. Up to 20%, it was probably not worth the bother to move. But above that point, they would physically move or get help and assistance in how to avoid and evade taxes. Now, the ultimate evasion in our country probably was bootlegging and gangsters in Prohibition days, because there were studies made. I actually worked on one of them. The higher the tax on alcohol, the more bootleg whiskey is produced and distributed. Higher tax, it's worth more to do it illegally and take the risk. Illegal drugs certainly demonstrate the same kind of thing.
I think cigarettes coming up on trucks or whatever, however they get in here, these bootleg cigarettes, we see that too.
I can't imagine spending. I'm too cheap to spend the money that cigarettes cost now. But Parkinson carried it even further. He said when you get high enough in your taxes, it affects your ability to be a leader and competitor in the world, because you are redistributing what is produced in your country and sending it off to the government to decide where they're going to spend it. And therefore, manufacturing will move offshore, films will be made offshore, people find other residences to locate to. And it's just as a lose-lose situation. The British government, the Labour government there until Margaret Thatcher came in, is a perfect example of what was happening when our taxes get too high. The Reagan tax reductions and the effect on our economy were magnificent, but once again, we're talking about higher taxes.
Yeah. Well, I think too, we go through a period of high taxes, and then, you have someone come along who will cut taxes, revenues increase because it's more broad sped, and people don't resent giving that kind of money because it's not so high. And then you forget about that. You forget about that process, and then that's why history repeats itself over and over again. He had a quote of Thomas Jefferson we can talk about briefly here. And Jefferson said, "I place economy among the first and most important virtues, and public debt as the greatest dangers to be feared." Public debt right now is growing in a mammoth way. It's so hard to even, again, because it's so big, it's that big number. How do you even grasp what you're talking about?
I would urge anyone to write the number of $1 trillion. And when the government, historically, when the government, whether it be the Department of Defense or any other part of the federal government, gives you a budget that they project and say will be $1 trillion or $1.2 trillion, as they've been talking about this week, that is usually about 1/3 of what the actual deficit costs will be. And this is just a fact of life. I once worked on a project where called the Superconducting Super Collider, which is a wonderful name for anything. And this was an enormous ring where we would have particles going in opposite directions at the speed of light, hitting one another to determine how the universe began. The track, an underground tunnel, was going to be about 80 miles long. So that with all kinds of magnificent things. But when they first did the budget, they left out the cost of the detectors, which would be like you buying a car and not getting the 4 wheels. And the 4 detectors were budgeted to be $8 billion in addition, which they left off the original budget. A little bit like the medical plan from the House that doesn't take care of the fact that they're going to have to pay the doctors and hospitals more money than they projected. I would hope that anyone that has questioned some of what we've talked about might consider looking at C. Northcott Parkinson. The books are still available, and he is an interesting and very appropriate read for someone in the United States today.
Well, I can say, having read it, he writes very tongue-in-cheek, a lot of humor in there, but there's a seriousness underneath that's very interesting.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you. And we thank you for watching. You've been watching Neighbor to Neighbor. My name is Lynn Coram. I've been here with Milt Eaton, and we hope you have a good day.